Okay, here we are. This is the second last lecture of the semester. The one that follows this will be posted on the weekend. This is supposed to cover chapter 7, just for your information. There'll be some reflections in the next lecture about American and British culture as a whole, but chapter 8 is not included on the exam. So anything I say about that last section, chapter 8 and the conclusion and the appendixes, that's not going to be tested, but you will have to watch these videos as usual. You get credit for that. So please tune in to watch them, even if you watch after the exam is over, you'll still get credit for it. You can still learn about this course from the textbook and not listen to me, but I think it's much more efficient if you listen to the things I emphasize, because that's what I put on the exam. So let's proceed. We're going to talk about, in this lecture, we're going to talk about Hollywood, the American film industry, and entertainment in general, but our focus can't be spread out to sports and music and other forms of entertainment too much, because our time is limited, can't cover everything. So the focus is going to be on Hollywood. The title for today is That's Hollywood, which is the sort of second section of chapter 7, after the part that describes the American century and separates it into 5 sections, 3 major eras of American culture and 2 sort of destabilizing, interruptions in the 20th century. So we're gonna do a similar thing with Hollywood, with American cinema. Just talk about how Hollywood progresses through the 20th century in 4 sections. This information is all over the internet, so you can find it yourself easily. This is sort of the way people look at it. I'm not actually a big movie buff. I've watched lots of classic movies, but I'm really not an expert. I have friends who work in the movie industry, several of them, and one in the UK and one in California, and they would laugh at my description probably because of their intimate knowledge of how the industry works. But as a broad overview, I would say Hollywood sort of reflects the economic and cultural development of the United States. As Hollywood, you see Hollywood, the people that are in it, the casting is very, very select, especially at the beginning of the 20th century. And as the American culture accepts civil rights in the 1960s and recognizes that it's being very selective, in favor of white men, wealthy, privileged white men usually, but sometimes just talented white men, and excluding women, first of all, but anybody else of a minority, Asian or Hispanic or African American, doesn't matter. All of those people don't get work. They don't get to act. They certainly don't get primary roles, and then they don't get recognized by the Academy Awards, even if they do. You can just take a look at still how lopsided it is. Superheroes being an easy example. Black Panther was a very successful superhero movie, and I liked it a lot. Sadly, the main actor passed away after he filmed the movie, but it was almost unique in that the main character was who had all the lines and all the focus on him was an African American actor. Similarly, there's not very many women, and if you look at the Avengers or you look at X-Men and stuff, it's mostly white men and a few white women fighting against villains who are, for the most part, white men too. Magneto is my favorite villain, and his character is amazing, and the acting is amazing, but it still is misrepresentation of the population. So that's one of the key elements of Hollywood that hopefully, independent films seem to do a better job of being progressive in that sense and representing population better. All Koreans know about Parasite because Parasite won the Academy Award for Best Picture, and that was the first time that an Asian film had won. And you got 100 years plus of Hollywood and just one example of an Asian film winning, which I think there's more than 1% of the population wanting to be involved in Hollywood, and talent-wise, it's a much higher percentage. So let's rewind for a second. I know I frequently say this is not a history class, but history is the study of everything, really. So Hollywood has a history just like everything else. Technology also is another aspect of Hollywood. This is, if you can't tell already, this is one of the big questions, right, that might appear on the exam, a sort of 5-point question, like explain how Hollywood developed and how it reflects American culture or something like that. So you got technology is a large part of it, and I said economy and culture as a whole. I just talked about representing different types of people ethnically on the screen and how much they get recognized for their talents. Obviously, as the American economy got bigger and people had more money, there was more theaters. The theaters, you would think there'd be more theaters and there'd be more variety, but the exact opposite happens. As the economy grows, the number of studios shrinks dramatically, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But that's largely due to the fact that Hollywood movies, that what we call the blockbuster, which incidentally became the nickname of a bomb in World War II, where it's a blockbuster literally blows up an entire block of a city. But in this sense, obviously, it doesn't mean destruction. It means that everybody on the block goes and sees it. So it's a Hollywood blockbuster. It's a very successful movie. That's all it means. These blockbuster movies cost, usually blockbuster doesn't come out of a low budget. It's a really high budget film. So your studio has to be able to finance that expensive film. And if the film fails, they have to be able to absorb that loss without going bankrupt. So in many cases, that's what happens. A studio makes a very expensive movie and that's it. For Koreans, I know you're not as old as me, but when I first came to Korea, I watched this Korean film called D-War, and it's really one of the worst movies I've ever seen. I saw it on opening night. It's just very confused. It's got a lot of Korean mythological elements mixed in with sort of old-fashioned American tanks, and there's dinosaurs and sort of Lord of the Rings type things going on in it, and you're just not sure if it's an American fantasy, sci-fi movie, war movie, or a Korean, traditional fantasy mythological story, or the Imugi there's certain scenes that were really iconic, like the Korean dragon wrapping itself around a skyscraper. But basically, Shim Hyung-rae, I think his name was, he was a comedian, and he tried to become a director, and he ran over budget several times, and he just couldn't, the special effects were just awful, except for a few remarkable scenes. The whole thing was, and it was very, very short. I just remember being thankful that it was short. But anyway, that's a perfect example of that happened many, many times over to American studios and American directors, where they just went for it, and the film flopped, and it didn't make enough money, and that was the first and last film that Shim Hyung-rae made because of that, and it went the same way. There were hundreds of studios in America, and now there's, you know, Disney, Paramount, Universal. And some of them are MGM and Disney are the same, and Time Warner, you know, used to be separate. They've merged a few times. There's just a handful of them left. So in the beginning, though, the technology was very simple. There wasn't any words. There's the black and white era includes this part. I have to switch to black. The black and white era includes this period where there's no sound, right? So black and white, we're not going to really focus on the exact year this kind of thing happened, but we'll just divide it sort of into almost quarters. So we'll just say, you know, into 1930, you've got black and white things, color, it starts being colorized, and sound starts being added too as you get into the classic Hollywood period. And the classic Hollywood period roughly lasts, you know, into the 1950s. And then New Hollywood follows that, and that lasts approximately until, we'll say, 1975. But really, it's a few years after that. But the earliest, you know, sort of endeavors into the contemporary Hollywood style start in the late 1970s. In particular, Star Wars happens in 1977. That's sort of one of the the films that's most representative of the change of the style. So you have black and white films. If we had class time, I'd show you a little clip of Charlie Chaplin. I love showing the movie Modern Times, where he's working in the factory, and he just started losing control of his body and becoming sort of a automated, crazy factory worker. It's good for reflecting on how work has changed as well as how film has changed. So I recommend Modern Times, Charlie Chaplin. If you have a chance, you can probably watch a clip on YouTube. That's usually what I do. Charlie Chaplin, Modern Times. It really reflects some of the things we talked about in the class about World War I, you know, changing everything, internationalism and technology, and you know, the imperial period ending, you know, and European countries breaking into national, you know, countries rather than empires, all that kind of stuff. You know, Charlie Chaplin's most famous actor during that you know, transition and the tragic consequences of World War I. So people start to realize that they have these things called moving pictures. There's no sound in them yet, but sound is coming, and that's where we get the word movies from. Initially, it's France, especially French cinema, that is leading the way, and some other European countries like Germany have their own cinema. And American cinema rapidly catches up and starts investing. There's some competition about where exactly the development of movies is going to focus. Florida becomes one of the possibilities, and there's some studios in the Northeast. They're scattered all over the place, but they soon start to concentrate in California, and then out of that you get Hollywood. Going into the classic Hollywood era, one of the major factors is the star power of actors. So actors, of course, you need actors throughout. Charlie Chaplin is an exception, though. Lots of films, the actors are not as important as the story or the studio, or what the film looks like, the directing choices and stuff like that. But soon after Hollywood starts to develop, the star power, the attraction of the particular person, the ability and the talent of that actor being in a movie becomes more and more important. And of course, they start getting paid more and more. And then Beverly Hills starts to develop, and rich people start building enormous houses there, which is something you can go and see today. There's American celebrities who live in those gated neighborhoods in Beverly Hills in Los Angeles, which dates back to World War II. Now, something that happens the thing that really ends classic Hollywood, and you have to read these sections. They're not very long, so this won't take you very long. But one of the things that happens is the television is invented, and it's invented long before the 1950s. But before World War II, most homes don't have televisions, and the television programming is not developed. So, there's 24 hours of television on 200 channels right now, and you got internet and whatever. You can watch forever, and you can watch until you die, and you'll never run out of stuff, even though it'll probably be boring at a certain point. It wasn't like that in the beginning. Even when there was televisions and you had a television, the programming would stop at like 10 p.m. Older Koreans will remember this too, because this is more recent in Korea, but there would just be nothing on TV at night. Like the programming would stop late in the evening. There'd be nothing to watch after midnight until, like 7 o'clock in the morning, and then the programming would start again. So there was only daytime television. There was no such thing as night television or 24-hour stations. Even when I was young, some stations would just cut their programming, at 1 o'clock in the morning. They would just be bars, colored bars on the screen, and there would be nothing on that channel. Certain channels would be 24 hours and others would not. So that was really, once the programming started to catch up to the demand, once people had televisions and then the programming started to develop, there was another option. Before television was around, if you wanted to watch something good, you would go to the movie theater on whatever night it was, especially on the weekend. But this golden age of Hollywood is when that movie experience and going to the cinema every week was something that everybody did. The viewership is well over half the population is going to see a movie all the time. Some people go and see a movie every week, but that's not very common. I see a movie like in the theater once a year, probably, and that's largely to do with all these other services that develop. When I was young, VHS, there was a competitor for VHS, but we won't talk about that, Beta. But VHS is a cassette, and you could rent movies. All of those rental stores were everywhere when I was young, in the 1980s and 1990s. They're completely gone now because VHS and DVDs were basically killed by Netflix. As you know, everybody knows Netflix and Disney Plus and Hulu and HBO Max, and Korea's got its own streaming services now. YouTube Premium has stuff. So the technology completely changed how we consume Hollywood movies now. You can still go to the theater and see the big sound and have the experience, but you always have the option of pretty much, if you want to pay and you have the internet access, you can watch whatever you want from your home. So the beginning of that was the invention of the television, which happened earlier, 20 years earlier, but the distribution of the television really took off after World War II, when everybody came back and started working and had money to spend. They bought refrigerators and they bought laundry machines and dryers, home appliances and furniture and television. So America became a country of television obsessed people, and this has continued right down to Netflix today. How many people, how popular Netflix is, how much money it makes, and mostly that's because of Americans spending their money on that form of entertainment. So the actors are the major factor there, and the television competing with movies leads the movie theaters become a little bit more, I guess, the studios to become more innovative, so it becomes focused kind of more on the directors and the studio's choices. People like Stanley Kubrick and Steven Spielberg and stuff, Steven Spielberg, he's not old enough, I'm sorry, but he's an example of a person. I'm not really old enough to know all the people in this era, but movies like The Godfather and Citizen Kane and things like that tend to be recognized for their quality and their directing and casting and creativity and plot, which is usually attributed to the effectiveness or creativity of the director. These movies are produced in this after post-World War II period where people are, watching movies. The most popular kind of movies in the classic Hollywood period are Hollywood spaghetti westerns, mostly cowboy movies, which is a big misrepresentation of cowboys. We can't get into that too much, but we've talked about it already. Cowboys could have been any type of person. Native person could be a cowboy, but in the Hollywood version, it's a handsome white guy who's saving the town from an evil white guy usually. So these stereotypes and typecasting things get sort of ingrained. And New Hollywood sort of rejuvenates Hollywood a little bit with these directors coming up with more variety and more creative types of movies. So you start to get science fiction starting to be developed and fantasy movies starting to develop and horror movies. These genres start multiplying as the New Hollywood progresses. So there's genres and directors sort of contributing to what you get to see in the movie theater. Contemporary Hollywood is misleading because we are now in 2024, and I'm just going to make my own thing. I think you can say roughly from 2000 onward, you've got digital Hollywood, you've got CGI, and now you've got AI, and you've got all kinds of technology, electronic manipulation, and computers helping produce these movies. So now we're in a fifth era. This is my own idea, though, so keep this in mind. Professor Sullivan's edition. It's actually not in the book yet because I'm not that brave. But I think the next edition I will be, and we'll just, whether it's called Digital Hollywood or something else, I think it's time now that we're 50 years into the contemporary, that it's not contemporary anymore, because I was born in 1981 and contemporary Hollywood started in 1980 at the latest. 1977 was Star Wars. So what are the characteristics of contemporary Hollywood, though? Most of them you're familiar with. It's special effects, though. It's not CGI, okay? CGI and AI, this is something that's happening now, or that happened in the 1990s already, but the beginning of contemporary Hollywood is just a focus on special effects. So there's, in the textbook, it talks about special effects, explosions, airplanes flying by, big budget, blockbuster type movies that are expensive. Sometimes they're using models or, manipulating frames and stuff like that. The computers aren't there yet. They don't have the computing power or software to make the movies that but special effects start to become a thing. So action movies and science fiction movies start to become more dominant. And recently, you've grown up watching superhero movies, the Marvel Studios sort of era, digital era, where things like creating a realistic looking Hulk or Thanos or Thor fighting frost giants on a frozen planet in another place, or the Rainbow Bridge to Asgard. If you know what I'm talking about, that's great. If you don't, it doesn't really matter. It's just science fiction, space. You couldn't really make it look authentic. Couldn't make it look like it was a real place. It was just, we didn't have the technology. Once the technology enabled us to do this, these science fiction fantasy things, Harry Potter came out right at the right time. When the books were released, you couldn't really make Harry Potter come to life. And then as J.K. Rowling was finishing that series, they were making the movies of the first few books. It took years to make them, and Daniel Radcliffe, everybody thinks of him as Harry Potter, as much as, if you didn't know his name, Daniel Radcliffe, he just becomes synonymous with the character because he grew up playing that role. Emma Watson is Hermione. I don't even know who Ron Weasley's real name is, but if I ever saw him walking around, I'd say, "There's Ron Weasley." So they've the era we have now. Increasingly, we can take these imaginary spaces and put them on the screen, and you can see whatever you want. This is transforming movies and culture, as you know, in a lot of ways. There's a picture of a gun there representing action movies towards the end. It's talking about CGI and the Hollywood blockbuster. This is sort of what I'm leaning towards when on page 248 I'm starting to talk about things that are related. Completely generated, CGI worlds, like Avatar was, I believe, the first one that did that. But I mentioned the DC Comics or Marvel series, Transformers. Those are the movies that people took notice of as, taking imaginary things and making them look real. So that's where I'm going to stop with my discussion of Hollywood and how it developed over the last 125 years or so. And next lecture, I'm going to talk about American presidents, and I'm going to, reflect a little bit on what we've learned and how the applications of the information that we studied this semester, and that'll be a wrap. And the exam is on Wednesday, so don't study all night the night before. Try and spread it out a little bit over the weekend, and if you focus on the things that I talk about and you read the sections in the book that I asked you to, you'll be fine. So thank you for listening, and I will see you on Wednesday.